chapters. I mean, it's very interesting. Another thing also is that brings us to talking about preliminary chapters. I mean, it's very interesting. Another thing also is that brings us to talking about what we are talking is considering that everything is consciousness, or the source is consciousness for everything. At the end of the day, there is no other thing, except what we interpret as this or that. But in this environment, the programming is kind of rigid. And I imagine in another environment of a different level, maybe whatever you think can show up as if it was materializing or being rendered or something. Here is not different, but there is more rule, more organization, more structure. And there are people that think that anything can be done. I actually today think that probably a lot of things can be done, maybe anything, but not under any conditions, depending on how much spread the knowledge, the information is to other consciousness beings around. And everyone is seeing there is a tree on the corner on this block, and everyone has seen it. It's not going to disappear because it's very public. It's registered. Everyone remembers that. It will not disappear. Okay. At a limit condition, it could, because it's not solid, let's say. But there are things that...
Yeah, that tree is only rendered when somebody looks.
Yeah.
But because it's part of our history, every time somebody looks, that tree will be there. But it's not rendered when nobody's looking at it.
Okay.
So there really is no tree. It's a virtual tree. It's not a matter-based tree. It's a virtual tree. And that's the way virtual realities work. So if you open your window and go look out on that corner, you're going to see that tree, because that's part of our history, and the system will always send that tree to you in your database, and you'll interpret it. But when nobody's looking outside, then the system just doesn't render it. It's not rendered. So right now, in your mind, that tree's not being rendered because you're not looking at that tree. Matter of fact, those shutters and behind you aren't being rendered in your mind either. That's because that's toward the back of your head, not the front. So that data is not going into your mind. And if you turn around and look at them, then that data will be rendered to you. And now looking toward me, you won't be seeing that anymore. So you just get the information that you need when you look at it, which is what basically answers the quantum mechanics problem of the observer, called the observer paradox. Things don't seem to happen until there's an observer looking at them. Well, that's because a virtual reality is computed, but it can't just compute anything. It has some constraints. Anything that was there before, anything that's part of your history, has to always be there. Unless you go out and chop that tree down, well, now that's part of your history that you chopped it down, and now if you look, it won't be there. You see, so you have to keep track of history, otherwise your virtual reality is a crazy virtual reality, with nothing.
Makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Everything changes. There's no continuity. There's no context to it. So the virtual reality is rendered as data streams to individuals, and only as those individuals need the data. And when nobody's looking, then it's not rendering anything. Look at World of Warcraft. If World of Warcraft has no users, not a single person is logged on, well, you think that computer is just making trees and rivers and monsters and stuff? It's not doing anything. That World of Warcraft map doesn't exist. It only exists in the minds of the players. So now one player logs on, now the server starts sending that player a data stream. But it only shows that player what it is he's looking at, what he's sensing. It doesn't show him stuff that is behind him, just shows him what he's looking at. And ours is the same way. So it only renders, the rendering is done in a data stream to an individual, and that defines that individual's reality. Now, when we get that data stream, we interpret it based on our own, what we said earlier, based on our own fear and our love and our caring and who we are and our ego. We interpret that data, and two different people will interpret that data differently And then that means they live in two different realities because your interpretation is the reality that you live in. You see, the physical universe exists only in the minds of the players. There is no physical universe. There is no tree out there. It's just information. And when you look out the window at it, well, now that's put in your data stream. And World of Warcraft is the same thing. World of Warcraft has houses and, caves and mountains and rivers and different things in it. And anybody that goes at that part of the map will see those things. Those things are always going to be in the data stream at anybody's there looking at them. It works the same way. That's just the nature of a virtual reality. And the thing that's interesting about that is that the player, when you play the game World of Warcraft, the player has to be non-physical from the perspective of the virtual reality. So, if you looked at the elf's perspective or the barbarian's perspective in that game, the player can't be in their reality. It has to be non-physical to the elf. And the same with the computer. The computer computing that reality has to be non-physical to that virtual reality. So see, we're the same thing. Now here we are, we're avatars, and the computer has to be non-physical from our perspective. And the player has to be non-physical from our perspective. Consciousness is non-physical. It's a non-physical system. It's an information system, and information is non-physical. How much does information weigh? Nothing. How much space does information take up? Nothing. You see, now books take up space, and in squiggles of ink on a page, that weighs something. That ink weighs something, but the ink and the paper are not information. They're not information at all. They're ways of recording data. They're data, not information. The information is the meaning, the significance of those ink squiggles on that paper. What's the significance of that writing there? That's the information, and that's non-physical, and information only exists in the mind of consciousness. So the information itself, the meaning, the content is non-physical. Doesn't weigh anything, doesn't have any volume. It's not a physical thing. Books are physical, ink's physical, but information's non-physical. And you put ink in a book in a certain pattern, and now you've got data. Data can be physical, you see, but you don't have information unless somebody actually looks at the book, and then the information exists in that consciousness that's looking at the book. So information system, consciousness is an information system, and it has to be non-physical from the perspective of people inside the virtual reality, which is where our avatar is. And it's the perspective that our free will awareness unit has when it logs onto that avatar. That free will awareness unit's a little chunk of consciousness that only senses, only gets data streams according to what the avatar is doing. It gets data to show where the avatar is looking. It gets data to tell what the avatar is smelling, and so on, all five senses. So it gets 5 senses worth of data according to what the avatar is doing, just like in World of Warcraft. You get to see just what the elf sees. You don't see anything other than what your elf sees, or your barbarian sees, or your whatever they are, your wizard. That's all. And when they look at a certain place, you get to see what they see. You get to hear what they hear. That's what a virtual reality is. So ours is a little better than theirs. Theirs only has sight and sound. Ours has smell and taste and touch as well. So we get those 5 data streams of what our avatar sees, hears, smells, touches, feels. And that's that data stream. And then we get to interpret it. So you don't have to compute anything other than what you can see, smell, hear, taste, and feel. That's it. Now, that means if you cut somebody's head open, now you got to see brains, or you see insides. And that has to be computed, because now you can see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, whatever. So it has to be computed. But all of your insides don't have to be computed, only what shows on the outside. Your insides are only computed when somebody cuts you open and looks at them. And then they say, oh, you got a liver and you got kidneys, and they do these various things. Okay, well, that's because of the rule set. Our virtual reality, all virtual realities work on a rule set. Our rule set is physics, chemistry, biology. You know, those are the rules by which our rule set works. So you have all that stuff going on, but you don't have to render any of it. It's so simple. You see, it makes it easy to render. Some people have this idea, well, it'd be impossible to have a virtual reality. Look at all the calculation. You'd have to start with elementary particles, and from those elementary particles, you'd have to compute atoms. From atoms, you'd have to compute molecules. From molecules, you'd have to, compute, physical things, macro things that you could interact with, and all that computation would just be impossible. But it doesn't work like that. It's not a bottoms-up computation. That would be impossible. Just like you say, it's too much. It's too big. It's just too complex. You don't have to. All you have to do is compute what you hear, smell, see, taste, and touch.
But I mean, not only computing all the details, but also imagine building blocks of matter, real matter, becoming things and coming out of nothing magically, material, and start building things. And even if, it's so much easier to look into with this perspective. It's much easier to build something out of information, like a video game, and like if this is a video game or whatever, than to really build it out of material thing, And
right.
No one is finding any material
to
touch at the end of the day. Anyway.
Yeah, that's what quantum mechanics says, is that there are no material particles. They don't exist. They're only probability. You see, and it only stays probability until it's put in some consciousness's data stream. And once it's in a conscious data stream, now it becomes a part of this reality. But until it goes to a conscious data stream, it's not part of this reality, because this reality only exists in the minds of the players. It's just the same the way it is, whether you're playing Sims or World of Warcraft or this physical universe. It works exactly the same way. And, back in the early days of quantum mechanics, which was like 1915 and 1925, that's when quantum mechanics really got started. They were excited, but they didn't have virtual reality as a concept. That was just something that was unthinkable. It just wasn't in their, within their ability to think. If they did, they would have immediately seen that virtual reality was the answer, but they couldn't think about that. It wasn't until we got to the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s that virtual reality started to become a thing, and it started getting better and better. And now when you talk to people about this being a virtual reality, it's a hard sell. They say, oh, that just doesn't make any sense. All this chair I'm sitting in and all of this is just computed. Well, if it was just computed, wouldn't I fall through it? Or wouldn't that train run me over? And you say, well, no, of course not. There's a rule set. People in the Sims sit down in chairs all the time and they don't fall through them. It doesn't mean that it's a virtual reality, has its rule set. And that rule set is what we call science. And that rule set does have details in it and does have some deterministic relationships in it. That's the rule set. But that rule set then generates probability functions, and the simulation is run at a much higher level, not at the detail level, but at the level that you see, smell, hear, at the level of your senses. It's run, and it's run with probability. It doesn't have to be computed from the ground up. So it's a top-down probabilistic simulation that is much more efficient. If you had to compute this thing from the bottom up, if everything, if that tree out there, that you were talking about, all the cells in it and all the parts inside the cells and so on, if you had to compute all of that, just put a tree there, that just wouldn't make any sense. Well, you don't. You have a rule set, and that stuff evolved because of the rule set, and you don't have to render any of it other than what you see when you look out. So when you look out at that tree, it only has to render the side of the tree and the leaves that you can see. That other side of the tree is not rendered at all to you. It doesn't exist to you. Somebody else looking at it from the opposite direction, they don't see the side that you're seeing. So only that side's rendered to them. You can walk all the way around it, and as you move, different parts of that tree are being rendered to you. And when you can't see, the other side's not being rendered to you. So the whole reality's that way. So you stand people all around the tree. Now somebody's getting the tree rendered from every aspect. Well, that's true. And that tree is a part of the history, so anybody walks around it, they'll see the same kind of things on it. But each person's getting a data stream. And there is no tree. There's just information being sent to consciousnesses that are then interpreting that information as this reality. So once you get your mind around the concept of a virtual reality, everything falls into place. And all of these paradoxes resolve themselves. And though it's a hard sell today, I'd say 10 years from now, certainly 15 or 20 years from now, it'll be the easiest sell ever, because people by then will have had experience in virtual realities that are just as real as this one. And they'll get in that thing, they'll put on the pressure suit that, they can actually feel things, and it'll have things that you can smell and things that you can taste, and everything will be that well done, and you won't be able to tell it from this reality. It'll be just as real as this reality. And at that point, people won't have any trouble at all seeing this physical universe as a virtual reality, because they will have experienced virtual realities and know that you can't tell the difference between them. A virtual reality is real when you're in it, and it has consequences when you're in it according to the rule set that defines it.
It's curious that at the end of the day, technology usually brings a lot of bad things to everyone around. And in this case, it may end up that our technical evolution is already making it easier for us to understand our real environment, how it works and how it is. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Until there was the concept of virtual reality, nobody could have thought of that as the solution to the problem. You've got these physics problems about particles being probability distributions, and why is the speed of light a constant? And, that the problem the neuroscientists have, about, that there has to be another meta layer beneath the layer that we see, otherwise things don't make sense. And, Lipton, who has a problem with the fact that people's intentions modify their biology, and, how does that happen? And you have the placebo effect that, people's attitudes and thoughts will modify their health. So you have all these facts that are part of our reality that are telling us that this isn't a material universe. It's based on information. Mind is fundamental. Consciousness is fundamental, and the physical is not. Well, once you have that, and then you know that consciousness has to be non-physical from the viewpoint of the player, of the avatar, then everything just goes together and it just says VR. But until VRs were a thing, nobody could think of that. It just wasn't in the mental space. It wasn't available. It wasn't in the decision space for somebody to come up with. So that's why those physicists back in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s got frustrated, because the concept was beyond them. And now that the concept's here, well, now things are changing. Like I say, it's the biggest groundswell and new paradigm shift going on in multiple sciences today, because that actually is the way reality is, because that answers the experiments and that solves the paradoxes.
But there were, in the past, some good guys that, even not having anything, found some way to explain a few things, like Plato's cave. Huh? It's like he was talking about virtual reality without knowing that it was a virtual reality.
Well, so was Buddha, and the world is an illusion. Well, the thing about that is that, to explore outer space takes a lot of energy and a lot of technology. But to explore inner space, all it takes is enough free time to sit down and think about it. Mm-hmm. So humans have had the opportunity to explore inner space and to explore the nature of their consciousness and the nature of the larger conscious system forever. As long, since whenever humans first, jumped out of the trees and started walking around like humans, then they had the ability to understand these deep thoughts, because it's all there. All of these things that I came up with wasn't because I read books. It's because I studied consciousness. And then you surprised me with things like the Buddha, said the same things that I end up saying, for the same reasons, of course. So it's all there. And we've had people in every age, in every country, in every part of the world who have understood the nature of reality, in profound ways. But they've never been able to explain it logically and as science. It's always been explained by description and as poetry.
Metaphors.
Yeah, metaphors, Yeah, so we've had, shaman and indigenous cultures that could become a wolf and, run around in the woods and see things and whatever. But that's just consciousness, you see, and the metaphor of the wolf is just a metaphor. Mm-hmm. They're getting data out of databases, but they don't know that. They can't think that, so they think something that they do understand, like, well, they're running around like a wolf. So that's the metaphor they use, and that metaphor limits the data they can get.
Or flying like an eagle. They are flying, not necessarily like an eagle, but it's similar.
Yeah, it seems that way, but that's their metaphor in order to get the data.
Yeah.
So we've had people who have understood these things for a long, long, long time, but now we can understand them in a way that it's logical and that it's science. It's not, it's not metaphysics, really, it's physics. Mm-hmm. When we get the physicists to say this is a virtual reality and it's a subset of something more fundamental, and that thing that's more fundamental is consciousness, and that's an information system. When we get all of that being said by the physicists, then all of our science will change. Everything, that's the whole root system of science will be torn up and replaced by something better, something that answers, more questions and answers all the old, the old data, all the old experiments. All those old facts are still facts, and it has to answer those as well. So it explains all the old facts and explains a whole lot of new facts. So that's what's different. Before, it's always been poetry. It's always been interpreted. Somebody had to interpret. Well, what does that mean that this reality is an illusion? So then a bunch of people can sit around and talk about what that means, that Buddha said that the reality was an illusion, and they can come to 10 different, conclusions about what that means. But this virtual reality, like in MBT, is not that way. This is logical, and you don't, you read it, and it's just there. It's logical process. It's not
understandable in plain way.
Yeah, in a logical way. It's not something that has to be interpreted. Mm-hmm. It's something that just is the way it is, and it makes sense. So it's science now rather than metaphysics or philosophy or religion. We're talking about religion, that most religions have threads of truth going through them. There are things in those religions that are absolutely right. That is the way the world is. Mm-hmm. God is love. That's a pretty good metaphor. Mm-hmm. But there also was a lot of nonsense in religions. A lot of things that, creeds and dogma and stuff you had to believe and stuff that people made up. Yeah, and a lot of fear-based stuff, keep that money coming, that sort of thing. So you had that too. But there's a lot of basic concepts. Mostly the people who started those religions had a bigger picture. They understood things. But as time went on, the people...
And sometimes they were not trying to start a religion. They were just sending a message like you did, and sometimes someone starts doing a religion of what you say, and it's not your fault.
Yes, that is the truth. So, yeah, lots of people have made these kinds of discoveries of inner space. It's not that hard. That's why I tell people you can do it yourself. Get your own information. You don't have to take my word for it or anybody else's word for it. You don't have to read it in a book. Go experience it. It's not that hard to experience these things firsthand, and then you'll know it. It will be your experience, and then it will be your truth. Because if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So that's the key. It's not that hard to experience. All you need is to take a little time and explore some of your inner space, and you'll find it, and you'll be able to demonstrate to yourself that it is indeed truth.